Joining us now to talk more about the fundraising and cash on hand situation of Donald J. Trump, billionaire, Spencer Zwick, who I say, without fear of any contradiction, is one of the top political fundraisers ever in either party in the history of this young country. He was Mitt Romney's finance chair in the last presidential campaign, and he now heads Paul Ryan's finance operation. Spencer, thank you for coming back.
Thank you.
So there's lots of talk about how Donald Trump's current financial situation is dire. His campaign says it's not a problem. What is the reality of the current mismatch between what the campaign needs to spend and how much they have?
Well, going back 4 years ago, I remember the month of May was critical for Governor Romney and for our campaign. And we raised about $75 million in the same month, had about $100 million cash on hand. And we knew that you don't get the month of May back. You don't, because once you get into the fall, you need to be campaigning and not raising money as much. And so now is the time to be raising money. I worry that they have passed through the month of May and really not performed that well on the fundraising side.
But when you say you worry about it, because you have you come around to Trump and become a full-fledged Trump backer? No,
but I'm a loyal Republican, and I want the Republican Party to be successful, and so I'd like to see the Republican Party win.
You're not where Governor Romney is, though, in his full-throated. Someone who obviously you worked for in successive cycles. You're not where Governor Romney is with respect to Mr. Trump.
I haven't decided what I'm going to do in the fall. Right now, I'm 100% focused on Paul Ryan and his agenda and his effort. By the way, we're raising records amount of money at Team Ryan, and I think we're doing that because Paul is talking about an agenda and a vision for America.
Is it not the case that you have to kind of work hard? I mean, you worked really hard to raise a lot of money for Mitt Romney. It seems to me you have to kind of almost work almost as hard in the opposite direction to be in the state they're currently in. $1.8 million cash on hand. That's less than dozens of congressional candidates, including some who will run unopposed, and they're in the red. So they're effectively a bankrupt campaign at this point. It seems to me you kind of have to try to be in that far in the hole at this point.
You would think, sitting at the top of the ticket, being the Republican nominee for president, that you just could show up to a few events and you could raise more money than that. But I think people want a message and they want to hear a vision articulated by the candidate. I don't think you can blame this just on the operations of the campaign or the finance staff or the bundlers or the donors. At the end of the day, the buck stops with the candidate.
So you worked for a candidate who had a lot of wealth, maybe not as much as Donald Trump, but a lot of wealth. And you've seen this in past with people are saying now, Trump should just write a big check. Just explain to people the psychology that takes over for people who might give once a very wealthy person writes a big check. How hard is it then to raise money?
Almost impossible, because what happens is people say he doesn't care about the donors. He may not want this as much as because he's not willing to spend the time raising the money. For someone like Mitt Romney or Donald Trump, it's easier to just write a check than to ask friends and colleagues to do the same.
So if Trump wanted to self-fund, again, as people are talking about, as he talks about, it seems to me he'd either have to go all the way and be willing to fund the entire thing or not do it at all. Because the minute he gives, say he gave $50 million, would that be enough? It's not enough to get him through it, but would that be enough to trigger the psychology of donors saying, well, if he gave $50 million, he can give $50 million more?
I think it would. I think people would expect him to give more and to turn over the next card the minute he writes a check.
So he's got to either commit, I'm funding the whole thing up to $500 million, or he shouldn't write a big check.
Well, the interesting thing is all throughout the primary, he said, I'm not going to raise money. I don't want to spend time raising money. And, if you look at the May report, turns out he meant what he said.
So you made the comment just a second ago that it comes back to the candidate and the candidate's message, right? We all know that in the past 3 weeks, that Donald Trump has said a number of things that were problematic in terms of his poll standing, in terms of a lot of people in the Republican Party getting uncomfortable with him, talking about Judge Curiel, things he said after the Orlando shooting. What do you hear from donors who are kind of skittishly getting sort of in some big names getting on board the Trump train? What do you hear from the donor community in the wake of Trump's bad 3 weeks in terms of the message that you're talking about as being central?
I think donors are really craving an opportunity to be inspired, to be led by a candidate. And for many, they're not seeing that, because just when they start to get comfortable, we hear a comment about a judge, or we hear a comment, post-Orlando tragedy about himself. I think Donald Trump, in order to raise money, should stop talking about Trump University and start telling the American people what he's going to do as president in the first 100 days.
So let's talk, your message point I think is clearly right, but let's talk about just the mechanics of fundraising, which you know well. So let's say Paul Manafort and Donald Trump called you and said, Spencer, you know a fair amount about this. What should we do going forward to get ourselves out of the hole? Just talk about the mechanics. Should they be focusing on super PAC? Should they be focusing on the RNC? Small dollar? How should they try to get out of this hole?
Well, I don't understand why the Trump campaign has not engaged a low dollar community in terms of giving $10, $20, $50, $100. He talks about how he can gather thousands and tens of thousands of people. Why not ask them to give? It might not be thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars per person, but if he has enough money coming from small dollar contributors, it's going to add up. Ask Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. So back of the envelope, because again, you studied Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, and what you all did. How much could he raise that way, do you think?
He could put, $100 million in the bank that way if he actually put an
between
effort
now and
behind
November,
it.
or just a couple months?
Yeah, he could probably do that between now and November. But I think the other part of it is he's either going to need to get a super PAC actively engaged or really merge with the party and have the party begin to take over his fundraising. I think they've proven that at the Trump campaign, either they're not capable or they're not interested in raising money.
Well, they seem to be. They're spending a fair amount of time in red states raising money, so they're not rejecting the notion that they need to raise.
Well, if you're going to spend the time, you might as well do it well.
Yeah. He boasted about raising 12 million or so in Texas on this California swing. Were those impressive numbers to you?
Yeah, if those turn out to be true, and he's actually raising that money, maybe he has enough momentum. You have to remember, he won the primary without having to raise or spend too much money. So, and largely that's your fault in the media for giving him hundreds of millions of dollars of free advertising. He might become president of the United States without spending a fraction of what Mitt Romney or Barack Obama spent.
Bottom line, Spencer, you watched how the financial disparity, as successful as you were, the financial disparity between your campaign and the Obama campaign cost you enormously politically in these months, in June, in July, pre-convention in 2012. Yes. When you look at the situation now and how hard it will be to dig out of this hole, do you think that it's just impossible, that the disparity is too great to ever really make up, and that the political consequences will be huge for Trump?
Well, I think the month of May was the opportunity for him to, as the presumptive nominee, while Hillary Clinton was still fighting with Bernie Sanders, to raise a bunch of money and to begin to define his opponent.
That month's gone, and so is most of June.
Yeah.
So you have the annual State of the Union address where the president defines the state of the nation in one word. Define the state of Donald Trump's fundraising situation in one word.
One word in his fundraising operation.
Fundraising situation is?
And crisis.
Crisis. It's two words, but we'll hyphenate it.
Okay, just crisis.
Yes, crisis is good.
Okay.
All right.